Are you tired of feeling overwhelmed and isolated about what you should be doing financially? If staying in the same position has you missing out on the most important things, like eating breakfast with your kids, you're not going to want to miss our upcoming Inner Circle Live event.
Russ, when people come to our event, they're going to pick up their very first domino. Let me explain what I mean. They're going to figure out who they are as an investor. They're going to gain access to 6 different passive income opportunities and the experts bringing it to them. And they're going to be able to put it on autopilot.
Right now, go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/live and don't forget the discount code PICAST. Welcome into the Financial Freedom Roundtable, where each week we break down complex financial topics so that you can more easily understand them and, more importantly, take action on your path to becoming financially free. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Grateful to have you in the room. I'm Russ Morgan. They call me the idea guy, mostly because lack of fault guy didn't sound so cool to me. But enough about me for a moment. Let me introduce you to my co-host, my partner. He's the Italian Stallion. He's got the license plate covered to prove it. Mr. Joey Ray. Stallion, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, my friend.
Joey, do this before you die is the topic. Why would we break down such a interesting, maybe even morbid conversation on the podcast?
I'm going to take this back to Luke 12:48. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And I know the context of that conversation that Jesus was having had to do with the coming of the kingdom of God, and that we should be about God's business. But I also believe it applies here that we're teaching you week in, week out, the path to financial freedom that also comes with it, the path to generational wealth. And we're talking massive amounts of death benefits and other things that are passing from generation to generation, along with this knowledge. And if we don't do our part to then pass along the knowledge to our spouses, what a great loss that would be. Like, what a terrible situation we could be in. So I think this is super, super important to be talking about. It's never urgent, but it's always important.
What is urgent? Life is urgent, bro, right?
Exactly.
You've probably heard this saying, close your eyes, envision what you want to accomplish, then open your eyes and start building and taking steps to get to what you want. I think some of the things when I think about what do I want to accomplish? What are the things that would be the most ideal that I would want to run hard after would have fallen into the conversations you just said is leaving a legacy to my spouse, to my kids, to the generations thereafter. And well, I pray that the day that I die, my wife is shortly thereafter me, right? That she doesn't have to suffer without understanding how to turn on, the TV upstairs, or, wondering who has the phone number for the guy who cuts our grass, like any of those things. Like I don't want her to have to try to deal with all that stuff. But I do think that if I go well before her, man, I better prepare her well, right? And today's conversation is going to be around the things that we need to do before we die as it relates to those that we will potentially be leaving behind. We're going to break this down into 3 areas. We're going to talk about what do you know, or what do I know that no one else knows, right? There's so much knowledge that that we possess. We're unconsciously competent, meaning that we have all this information, but yet maybe nobody else understands that we have it. And we haven't written it down, haven't been able to pass it along to somebody. The second thing we're going to cover are what are those things that you can do, right? Like, now that I know this is a problem, what are some of the solutions I can take? And then lastly, we're going to talk about maybe some of those tools that you can use to help you make it simpler. Sound like a plan, Stallion?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right. Well, thankfully, you and I are not the only ones breaking down this conversation, are we? We're sitting around the round table with the dream team of financial coaches. To my left, I got the piano man. We're all in the mood for passive income, and you have a scene of light, Mr. Matthew Hammond. Welcome back, Matthew.
Hey, it's good to be back, Russ. Glad to be here.
Do this before you die. What's important about this topic for you?
Well, I mean, Joey already kind of touched on it, about building a legacy. And, you never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. So whatever you build up during your life, you're going to have to leave it to somebody. Ideally, you'd like to leave it to your heirs to live on and keep that legacy alive. Unfortunately, if you don't prepare those heirs, whether it be your spouse or your kids, if you don't prepare them on how to actually manage that legacy, manage those businesses and those properties, so that they can continue the legacy on through their lives, you're immediately setting yourself up for failure, and you're setting that legacy up for failure.
Well said. All right, let's get around the table to, you're right, man. He's strong, he's smart. He's our inner circle director. When he's not lifting weights, he's lifting lids. Make sure to listen to what he says, because Simon does. Mr. David Karcher. Welcome back, David.
Good to be back, fellas. Thanks for inviting me back. Pretty excited about today's topic.
Do this before you die. Why do we cover this today, in your opinion?
Because I would say that a lot of people have the same type of mindset that my own wife has. And that mindset is, here's our plan. Here's her plan. She plans to die before me so that she doesn't have to deal with it. That is a terrible plan. Yeah. I mean, that would be ideal, right? But let's not practical. So because that's not a practical plan, it is no plan. We're going to have to do something different. And so I'm here to just say, hey, I need this as much as everybody today. So here, let's go.
That's right. What's the old saying? If you're leaving, you're taking me with you, kind of thing.
Exactly.
I'm going to die so much quicker than you are. That's right. All right. Last but not least, we got the retiree of the group, Mr. Catch Me If You Can, when he's not killing bears with his bare hands or spear diving for tuna. He's dropping gold nuggets right here, the one and only Mark Caragucci. Welcome, Mark.
Good afternoon. Looks like the sun is just as bright there as it is here. We're getting a break in the clouds before we go into 6 months of gray. So I'm pretty excited.
Oh my goodness. I hope this isn't the way you're leading it to do this before you die. I know the Northwest can be a little, down in the dumps as we get into the wintertime.
It can be. This topic, though, this really rings true for me this year. With when my dad passed away, he had, quote, done everything right. He had a trust, he had a big red book, he had all these files, and everything was documented and organized. However, it was still challenging to find everything because it was his system. And so the reason I believe this is important is it can't just be your system, right? The documentation or the accounting or to like Matthew's point and Joey, the legacy of the business. It can't just be your system. It's got to be the group's system. And so for me, this is really important of, like Nelson did, training his wife. And when he knew he was in his final days, training her to be a widow, educating her on where everything was supposed to go. That to me is really what this is about, is people need to not just know where to go look for the info. They need to know how the info needs to be read and how that map key needs to be applied.
Well said. Well, you have all the talking points. Now, guys, you need to sit down at the table and belly up.
Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
All right. Big task today. I know we're up for it. Let's talk about the first big idea that we're going to have from today's podcast. What do you know that no one else knows? Like, let's think of what that list is, because it's deep, it's wide, it's probably way farther than we can cover. But let's start uncovering some of those nuggets. Mark, I'm going to let you go first. You mentioned your father passing recently. Some of this is a lot more fresher for you. Talk a little bit about what were some of the things that you knew that maybe your spouse doesn't know, but also things that maybe your dad knew that he didn't pass along to your mom and to you guys.
A lot. There was a lot. And what I realized is that, how and what all the bills are. What are all the bills that are being paid? Because in today's world with auto pay, so much can happen behind the scenes that the other person may not even know about. even the same thing with investments. And so one of the things, that I know that my wife doesn't know is, hey, what are all the bills for the house? What are all the bills for the cars? What are all the bills for this, that, and the other? And then where are all the investments hiding out? What are the things that we have? There's long-term rentals, there's ATM machines, and there's a couple other things that are happening in there. And knowing where those things are and how to access them, I think that's going to be key, because like I mentioned at the beginning, that starts to bring the other person into the fold. And so it's not just a solo operation. You're not an army of one, but you're actually bringing the other person along. And so they can start to see where these things are happening, so that if you were to pass away prematurely, be taken before you have a chance to get all this through, they at least know where some of those things are hiding out.
Love it. How about you, Steve?
I'm going to go Ghostbusters on you. I know who to call. Who you going to call, right? You got to know who at that time, and I'll just tell you, about a year ago, my wife was telling me, she's like, Joey, I just don't know what to do if something happens to you. And particularly if something happened to you and Russ at the same time. Like that would be terrible. And so for me, it was a real challenge to just write everything down on just a simple Word document, but to say, with this business, what should you do with it? Should I sell it? Should I keep it? And just like knock that stuff down on the paper, but also who are the advisors that you should call when you have a question about this business? Who are the advisors should you ask about this particular asset? And being able to put that down on paper for her was super freeing, that hopefully she never has to know those things, but to now have people to call and know exactly for what purpose, that was a big deal.
I want to dig into this a little bit, right? Because I know it seems a little obvious, but what is the real value in knowing who to call? Like, what's the problem if she doesn't know who to call, in your opinion? What could go wrong?
Well, it could easily end up in the hands of the wrong person, right? That asset, she could get the wrong advice. She could get advice that's contrary to how we built what we've built together. It could be that she ends up with unnecessary tax burdens. It could be, there's tons of things that could have affected her. Not to mention, just take, for instance, she were to see that there's significant amount of like debts out there, right? There are things that we have created debts for. And if she were just to pay all of them off, and she's like, oh, I feel good about that. Well, that might have been good, but what would have been best? And it could have been that she could have taken that to reinvest that money and more than cover the expenses and actually create more stability for herself.
No, I agree with what you're saying there, because I think too oftentimes our spouses don't understand maybe the risk that we're taking or the weight that we hold because of our understanding of certain things. And we've developed a comfort for that. And if we're not here, then they would, like you said, if you had $4 million in liabilities and a $10 million death benefit came in, what do they do with it? They may just literally go pay everything off because they think, oh, that's the simplest process. So not knowing who to call could be a concern, them not knowing who are the people that are the most trusted. And has that changed? I love the way that you talked about building that list of who are those key people. But here's a challenge I have for you. Does she have a relationship with each one of those people? If she doesn't, is she going to call them? The answer is probably unlikely, right? And if she calls them, will they have that connection? Will she be able to trust what they're saying just because you said so? Probably not. I think we've got to figure out as we come up with what do we know that no one else knows, but also we got to think about what are those failures that can go wrong? What are the ways that even if, like Mark, in your situation, your dad wrote out his plan, but because it was his system, he didn't share that system. Like my mom could type 100 words a minute at one point. She also knew shorthand. I don't even know if that's still a thing. I didn't understand what shorthand was until she tried to explain it. And I still probably could explain it to you. But it's a way of taking notes that you can do it in basically abbreviation style. And she could tell you exactly what everything meant because she had learned that style. for the average person reading it, they wouldn't understand. It would be hieroglyphics to them. So I think we've got to figure out what are the things that can go wrong. What are those failure points? David, in your opinion, what's something that you know that no one else knows?
Well, I'm a sucker for a good treasure hunt. I mean, who didn't love the Goonies on their kids, right? Hey, you guys. But the reality is I really don't want my wife having to go on a treasure hunt, right? I sit down and just think about, my situation. My situation is probably not very different than everybody else listening to this radio. But, we've got bank accounts at multiple banks, right? We've got different businesses. There's policies, right? We've created these infinite banking policies. We've got syndications. We've got passive income streams. There are all of these things that I have right here. And my wife knows they're out there and they exist. But man, at the end of the day, I definitely don't want her having to go on a treasure hunt. And in the process feel like she doesn't have anything once there's potentially an abundance out there, but she just doesn't know where to go to find it. So that's a problem that has to be solved, and that's why we're talking about it.
No, I agree. Matthew, what's one thing that you know that no one else knows?
It's funny. The timing of this episode is so perfect because literally yesterday, Angie texted me just out of the blue and said, "Hey, I got logged out of Airbnb. What's our password again?" And if God forbid, if I were to leave this mortal coil and, and God does not allow text messages up in heaven, she has no way to find the password to Airbnb. And so it got me thinking, it's not just passwords. I mean, good grief, it's logins, obviously, but she may not even know all the programs that I use for managing our short-term rental. There's so many programs that we use for integration, for communication, for automation, and she has no clue. It's not that she couldn't learn it. She just has no clue because I've been doing all the legwork for managing our short-term rental. And so, and also, kind of going back to Joey's point on who to call, God forbid a pipe burst in the cabin, and I mean, who's she going to call? I know a plumber that I work with in the area that does a great job, but she doesn't know. Yeah. So it just goes back to all this stuff. It was just a light bulb went off in my head and said, oh my goodness, if I left tomorrow, she would have no clue what to do.
As you're listening to Matthew say that, how many of us small business owners have that issue in our business on a daily basis? Like, if I couldn't come to work tomorrow, how quickly would my business fail because I possess knowledge that no one else has, that I just unconsciously do the things? So what you're saying, Matthew, is that even in our personal lives, that becomes an issue, right? Because you're running a small business, right? Running a short-term rental business, and your wife is not calling you to say, hey, what's the password to Airbnb so I can book our next vacation? She's saying, so that I can see who's checking into our unit and have they paid, right? Or what's available and when can we go stay in it for our own personal time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she, God bless her. She wants to help me, but because I haven't shared all this information with her, her hands are tied as far as how much she can actually help me, even though she really desires to help me run this business.
All right, so let's stay with you then. What are some of the things that you can do, knowing that that's a problem? What can you do to help her?
Well, just kind of the things that I've already mentioned, obviously have a list of, the programs that we use for managing our short-term rental and all the logins for those programs. Because of course, you know how cybersecurity is these days. You have to change the password every 2 weeks, and it has to be at least 14 to 15 characters, non-repeating. And so it's impossible for me to remember, let alone her. So I would have to update, a document that has all of that information, but also, have to take it a step further. I mean, I'd really have to write out some SOPs, some standard operating procedures, because there's so many different scenarios that she may run into running the short-term rental, where she may not know how to handle it. If a guest is complaining about this or that, she needs to know how to respond to that guest, needs to know how to handle whatever problem that arises, during that guest stay. So, I mean, I need to write out a script, write out these procedures, and really just, help her, teach her how to communicate. It's kind of funny. I'm reading a book that the one and only Sharon Srivatsa recommended. It has nothing to do with business. It was actually the biography of Ben Franklin. And I saw a quote from Ben Franklin. It really just hit me in this scenario. He said, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. So frankly, I think, in addition to all the documents and the procedures that I may write out for when I'm gone, I really need to involve her more in the business while I'm still here, because I feel like that is really where she's going to grasp the information. She's going to really be able to absorb the information so that she can really truly be successful when and if I'm gone.
If you've listened to our show for any length of time, you've heard us talk about infinite banking and how we are able to use that concept to create over $50,000 a month in passive income. But it's just not that easy to figure out, how does this all connect into my own personal system?
Stallion, that's why we created the passive income operating system, bro. It shows you how to turn active income into passive income. It makes all the steps come together. If you would like to get access to it as a podcast listener, we've never given this away in public before, go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/PIOS. There was nothing worse than walking into class when you're in school and the teacher saying, pop quiz day. Why? Because you were unprepared. Are you unprepared though for financial freedom?
Don't be. Find out how close you are by taking our 30-second quiz at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/quiz.
That's a good point. I've heard this statistic, and I'm re-quoting it from memory, so I'm sure it's inaccurate. But we remember 10% of what we hear, 50% of what we see and hear, but like 85% of what we see, hear, and can repeat or take part in, right? And so that's kind of what you're saying. I think that there's the catch for you, is that when do you teach her? Do you teach her in a biography written down in a notebook that she reads after you're gone? Or do you teach her while she's here, right? Like, do you show her now so that these conversations are normal? Not that she needs to do them now, but she knows how to do them now, right?
Exactly.
How about for you, David? What's one of those things? You got that treasure map.
Yeah.
One of the ways that this treasure map isn't just floating around in a bottle somewhere with the cork in it, wait for Joey's kids to pick it up and bash it up or rock.
Yeah, I just think about all the things that are here that needs to be put down on paper, but more importantly, show her where the treasure lies, right? Not just write it out on a piece of paper, not put it in a folder, right? Not save some passwords, but hey, let's go down and let me introduce you to the personal banker that I have all of these accounts at all these different banks, right? Let me show you where we have these accounts. Let me introduce you to a banker. Let me show you where we keep these policies. Let me tell you who my agent is. Let me show you where these investments are, these businesses. Let's go look at some of the properties, or let's go look at some of the syndications, right? Let's take a trip, right? Let's do this thing together. And to Matthew's point, the more that I can involve her, the more I can include her. Now she knows where the treasure lies as well. And it's not just conceptual, but she's actually physically seen, touched, all of that.
Now, let me ask you, is there a good opportunity that when you do that with your spouse, she asks you questions that maybe you didn't think through? Like, why did you bury the treasure here? Why are you trusting this person? After a conversation with that person, I wouldn't give them care of a cat, much less our money, right? Like, I mean, do you think like that's possible? Your wife, Lee, very astute, like someone is going to be thinking through things critically. It's like, David, now, why did you do that?
Hey, knucklehead, what are you doing, right? I mean, yeah, absolutely, right? And the reality is we as men too often don't include, our spouses in these types of conversations or decisions when we really should. They've got an intuition that we can't touch. And so you're right. It's the more we can involve them in this process, the more buy-in we're going to get, the more they're going to have comfort and they're going to have peace. Let me tell you, when my wife's at peace, everything's well, right? When she doesn't feel comfortable about something, it's not a good situation.
And as you're listening to this and you're like, wait a second, I'm the one who does all this for our family. My husband's the knucklehead. He doesn't understand all of these things. The same thing's true, right? Like just because there's 5 dudes on here talking about this goes both ways. So the point here is to say, what is it that you know? If you're the one holding information that your spouse doesn't know or your family doesn't know, then how do you get them involved? And I love that, like you said, there is a possibility that our spouses will see something, ask a question that may help us get out of something, right? I wish I would have showed my wife or a couple of the deals I got involved in, Mark, earlier. Maybe she would have asked more critical questions than I did, and maybe I'd have more money because I would have gotten that money out before all went bad. What's something on your end that you can think about, things that you can do that could help?
Where my mind goes on this is the United States military figured out that there were subsets in the military, right? So we had active duty military, and then we had the traditional guardsmen and the reservists. And the United States military figured out pretty quick, hey, wait a minute, even though we have the same playbook, we're actually executing that book different because we're training in vacuums. And we're doing things apart from each other. So they started doing joint exercises, active duty and guard reservists. And that's where I think that's one of the things you can do. Spreadsheets. If I send you guys my spreadsheet that I use for my annual finance cataloging, it's going to look like a spaghetti sandwich because there's so many things moving around, and you're going to say, wow, that looks kind of cool, but I have no idea how this works. I don't understand any of it, and it doesn't make any sense. But it makes perfect sense to me. But if I can go through it with you, like you said, and help you see it, help you use it, help you input, then now you're going to start to see the functionality of it. And now you're going to be on board. And so that's where I think that's one of the things you can do. Like we've been talking about, we kind of hit on it earlier, which is, hey, don't play the game of I have a secret. Don't do this in a vacuum. You need to start bringing other people in that you believe and that you want to be the people who are caretaking once you're gone and managing, because otherwise you're just going to leave them a rando spreadsheet that you built and they're going to have no idea how to use it.
Stallion, what about you, man? You talked about who you got to call. How you going to ensure that they know who to call?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the challenges that you even made to me was like, man, who are the people to call, and are they always the same people? Like, have they been the same people for the last 10 years? Will they be the same people 10 years from now? And I think the question or the answer to that is no, right? It needs to be updated, just like most everything. You don't leave your will for 20 years. You don't leave any of those kind of key things in your life alone and untouched for long periods of time. So for me, it's like, man, I need to make this a part of an annual review. Like I always do a roles and goals analysis each year about who I am as a follower of Jesus, who I am as a husband and father, as a brother and son, all these roles that God's given me. And one of those needs to be to review this document and make sure that it's up to date and that those are the proper people in the proper seats in the event that were to happen. So definitely something I need to implement.
Here's one of the things I want to ask, this is rhetorically, is are there things that you're doing that you're like, hey, I've decided for our family, I'm going to do this, and my spouse is going to do fill in the blank other things. It's like, okay, we're divided and conquering here. We're just going to do this. And I can answer that for me. It's like, yeah, sure. For me, I'm going to manage the finances. Makes sense, right? I run my mouth on a podcast every week, help run a passive income mastermind, have, been the one who set up all these things personally for ourselves when I was doing that. Yeah, that's my thing, right? Like, and my wife wants no part of that. And I've just kind of like played along to that. And I'm challenged as we are going through this process to say, man, how short-sighted am I in that process? That we have a passive income mastermind. We get together twice a year live. And in those meetings, we break down opportunities. We break down deals. We build relationships with each other, partnerships sometimes. And my wife has gone on one of those meetings, but it was just for the vacation element, right? Like she never stepped foot in the meeting itself. So she's not any wiser to the information going on. And I kind of thought, well, because she doesn't want to do that, that's the best way to do it. I'm going to handle this. But now I'm doing her a disservice, right? Like, while she doesn't need to be in every single, we meet twice a month virtually and twice a year live. She doesn't need to be in all those meetings, but one of the 2 live meetings, I think she should participate in it. Now, I've got to find a way to make sure that that's fun, right? I need to make sure that she when she attends, that she's like, oh, that was super interesting. So I need to be able to build in elements to this that is, opening, or provides an opportunity for people who are not necessarily inclined to that to find value in it. But I definitely think that that's just a big thing for me. Or, it could be like playing games like Cash Flow, right? I know we play Monopoly, but Monopoly is not really real life, but the game Cash Flow from Kiyosaki, that keeps that mindset, allows someone to be sharp as it relates to some of these passive income strategies. I think that those are the things I'm challenged by on this. All right, let's finish this up. So we've talked about what's the one thing that we know that nobody else knows. And then secondly, what are the things that we can do to overcome that? But let's talk about maybe some tools, things that people can use, David.
Yeah. So, I'm not necessarily the most tech savvy guy in the group here. I still have like an iPhone 6, I'm very happy with it. So you're up to 15 or 16 now. So, I just think of what are some tangible ways, yes, that we can, build this out. I'm thinking of like, something as simple as just a firebox, right? Having a firebox in the house where I can put important documents, I can put important instructions, have them written out. Banks still have what they call them, security deposit boxes, right?
Yeah, safety deposit. Yeah,
safety deposit box, right? They give you a key, right? I mean, having something as simple as a key, I don't have to worry about a password at that point. I can just have a key and say, hey, go down to the bank, open the box, and let's go look at it. Once a month, once a quarter. Let's go review, again, kind of like I was saying earlier, let's show where the treasure is, but let's document that and then put it in a place where it's easy and accessible to get to. We don't have to remember a million different passwords. So that's something that I just thought of that really suits kind of my personality and the low tech in me.
But man, I thought of 2 movies when you were talking about that. I think one, Casino, when, Robert De Niro takes Sharon Stone down to the to show her where her box is, and then the second one is Brewster's Millions. Whenever Richard Pryor is watching the video from his uncle, it's like maybe you should create her a video, and when she goes down to the lock box, the video's in there. How about that, Mark? What's a tool, a piece of software, or something, technology hack that someone could use to help them better understand where all this stuff is?
Originally, I thought it was just giving her the password to my computer, but then I realized that's another password she has to remember. And so I thought, well, why don't I have an online, vault box. I'm like, why don't I just install that on her computer? And that way she already knows how to get into her computer, and then she can get into that vault box. And that way everything is there. Because the other fun fact too is when you open up your computer, depending on who you are, you probably have a bazillion tiles on your homepage when you open it up, and everyone's going to organize it just a little bit differently. So if I can get it into her computer's already organized how she wants it, and then she knows exactly where she needs to go. So to me, that's just an easy hack of putting it in a place that she already knows how to get into.
You said vault box. Is there a specific technology there that you're using?
So I use, and this is not an endorsement, but I use Microsoft's OneDrive.
Okay.
And so they have a OneDrive, and you have a password to get into that, right? But then there's also a vault box, which adds a layer of encryption. And so I've looked into it. I've asked other people. I have a really close family friend who is a Microsoft guru, and so he helps write the code. And if he's willing to put his stuff in there, I figured it was a safe bet for me. Plus, you can store all your photos. So for those of us that have a bazillion photos or whatnot on their phone, it's another place rather than paying Apple to use their cloud drive. It'll just automatically sync to that, and that thing is terabytes worth. And so we've got photos from I have no idea how long ago.
That's so good. Matthew, how about for you? What's a tool that that you use that you could share with somebody that they could be using to help them in this process?
Well, I will say, when we first started our short-term rental, I did have the brilliant idea. I did have good intentions to share all the access to Angie on the programs and the passwords. So I filled out a nice Word document and I emailed it to her. And that was 3 years ago. So, assuming she still has that email, the passwords will have changed about 57 times by now. So obviously it is completely useless. So I've kind of gone the route of, what Mark was speaking to, especially for the stuff that changes regularly, like passwords and the digital warehouses. So, I'll use something as simple as, Dropbox or Google Docs, just for updating, because you could update it on the fly. There's other programs like LastPass that helps you store passwords and everything. And I'm sure there's so many other programs out there that I'm not even aware of that maybe somebody in our community could even recommend. But I also love David's idea too of having the low tech storage as well, especially for the things that don't change on the fly. So you have all your key documents that just are not going to change, but have that access to for. So, I think a combination of the two is really, really what's important. And I still go back to, if I involve her in the business, she'll know where to go when she needs that information.
And she might find a better place to store it than what we would have, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. She's definitely smarter than I am.
Stallion, how about you?
Well, I'm going to try to go more on the digital side, even though I'm not necessarily gifted technologically. Visor is a software that we've introduced here on the community on the podcast. Visor, Vyzer, and it's a place where you can put all of your different things that you're investing in, whether they are kind of the easy things that are just naturally can go into an online system, or if it's something that's not necessarily that simple, like they have a magic box. And this is something Sharad and I were talking about recently. The magic box, you just upload, whether it's a lease or if it's a document, and they use the AI from that to create the actual investment into your Visor account. And that to me is brilliant. It's something that I'm still learning. I've got basics set up, but I would love to have that be more of a place that I could then share passwords and things like that with my wife, so she knows exactly what's going on with those. Do that coupled with a document, I think, that gives her the instruction manuals. I think that's a winner. And I'm going to bring it down to this idea that, last year we were in Scottsdale at a passive income mastermind retreat. And at that retreat, this is no lie, I had 3 different spouses who were attending for the first time come to me in the middle of conversation with their spouse and say, if something were to happen to him, it just happened to be the wives telling me this, I wouldn't know what in the world to do. And it wasn't like we were talking about this subject. It was just in the natural conversation of being at an investing, passive income event. And that to me told me, we're not alone in this. Everybody is trying to solve this. And so that's why I think this is so critical that we've taken some time to break it down. And, some of this stuff is really basic, but if you haven't implemented it, it really doesn't matter if it's basic or hard. You got to get after it. You got to create a solution of your own.
I'm going to finish with this as a purpose of trust statement. When you're wanting to leave instructions behind, you don't know the time frame and the environment in which someone's going to be reading those, and things change, right? I heard a stat the other day, whether it's true or not, that in 15 years, 50% of all the jobs that will exist don't exist today, right? So if we write down things in a document, the way that we're using that or the way we intended to use it could change dramatically over time. So we need to give instructions to those who are going to be receiving the financial treasures that we've stored and built, and give them some license to use those within a framework or a philosophy that we have, without giving them limits, like just restricting them without understanding what the future holds. And what I was able to do with my wife and I is to build out a purpose of trust statement that laid out it specifically the way that we saw the world, our family's core values toward, both investments, travel, education, the key elements that people that would be consuming that money and the way that we would have them use it. And I think that that's a tool that many people have not even thought about, haven't even considered. And maybe that's one of those things where you got to close your eyes and envision what you want so that you can open them and start taking steps to get there. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for breaking down this topic. Maybe not the most fun topic to talk about, but definitely an important topic that adds value. If you heard something on here that you're like, yep, I haven't done that yet, or yep, I need to be doing that, write down your list. Take time, put it on your calendar. You have life is urgent. All of these things that we're thinking about and talking about, we know are important, but we don't think that they're urgent, but life is urgent. Take time to do it right now. And if you know someone that needs to be hearing this, share it with them as well. As always, have an amazing day.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand, so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.